Acer Nitro. Viewers, meet the Acer Nitro. This was a PC that got traded in a few days ago. And it was very curious to me because the person who traded it in, they said they were having problems playing Fortnite competitively. And they said when they got into matches, these big matches where they're in a circle and there's all these buildings going up and stuff, that this FPS on this machine would dip. And I automatically responded, okay, what's the specs of your system? And they said it had an i5 8400, and then they said they've got a GTX 1066 gigabyte. And I'm thinking, well, these specs should play Fortnite, especially on low settings, which is what a lot of the comp players play on. This should play this game absolutely fine with no stuttering whatsoever. And so I then asked him, okay, how much RAM does it have? And he thought it had 16 gigabytes of RAM. But I just said to take a quick peep through the side panel and ask him how many sticks of RAM it had in there. And he said it only had one. And I was like, okay, well, it could be that, but usually even a single channel of memory on an 8400 should be okay, at least for not getting these big dips in FPS. And so what I said to him, I said, I'm so busy, dude, I don't really have time to look at it. And if I look at it, I'll have to charge you, unfortunately. And he said, look, you've got some PCs for sale. Can I just straight up trade this PC with one that I know works? And I said, sure thing. So he came in, he traded in his Acer Nitro, and then I haven't heard from him since, so the PC's obviously working really well for him. But this one here, the more I started to look at it, the more I started to realize what was wrong with these OEM systems. So what we're going to do today is go through this Acer Nitro N50-600 and find out all the things that I feel aren't up to par when it comes to selling a PC, especially for gamers. To the right of me here, we are running a stress test on the i5 8400. And even after a few minutes, this cooler is starting to get a bit noisy. The temperatures are in the 80-degree region. And the funny thing is, today's actually a pretty cool day here at about 23 degrees Celsius. So straight away, going through the hardware issues with this whole Nitro system here, it starts off even from the CPU cooler that they've implemented. It's really not that good enough, and the i5 8400 is actually a really easy to cool CPU in that you don't need a big cooler to begin with. But that's connected now to a motherboard, which is a proprietary board. And we did have some troubles with this when I initially installed an RTX 2060, and I couldn't get it to install properly. I then had to download the BIOS update, install the BIOS update, and that installed the graphics card afterwards. I also tested an AMD card on this, and that installed fine after the BIOS update. Before that, however, we could only use the 1066 gigabyte with this system. So it was a pretty bizarre problem in that if you don't know how to update a BIOS or you're not comfortable doing it, then you're really only locked into one line of graphics card on this system. And the temperatures got quite hot on this thing, as well as it having only a 550 gram cooler. So they're including a GTX 1066 gigabyte, sure, but it's really not the best example of a 1066 gigabyte. It's like the worst model you can get. But other than that, the CPU cooler managed to keep the CPU over 80 degrees. So this is for an i5 8400. So they're using a cheap cooler. They're using one of the cheapest model 1060s you can get. And then inside that, all that is mounted on a cheap motherboard. One of the cheapest I've seen, to the point where it doesn't even show you your memory speeds in the BIOS, and it locks you out to the point where you can't even read your memory speeds in a program like IDA64, for example. So the only way I found out that my memory speeds were at a certain level was when I booted up the system after the BIOS update, and it showed me that it was running at 2400 megahertz. Now initially this had a stick in it, I think it was 2666, but it was only in single channel. And so what this meant was this memory could be running at 2133 megahertz. Those 2666 speeds aren't guaranteed unless you have the option to lock them in the BIOS. So this poor person who traded his PC in could have had one of the worst case scenarios when running his game of Fortnite, when his hardware, especially the 8400, is much more capable of giving him better FPS. Basically, selling something like this to a consumer and having them have all these problems when all they buy these PCs for usually is the simplicity is not a good thing. It doesn't really go well with the brand image that I guess Ace is trying to portray. I don't know, because if I sold a PC and had a single stick of memory in it, and that wasn't even clocked properly, and then I'm putting in the cheapest CPU cooler, the cheapest motherboard, and this is the thing, the motherboard is not even anywhere near as good as an H310 motherboard, because at least all the big manufacturers that I know, like MSI, Gigabyte, ASRock, Asus, they all let you at least have the ability on an H310 motherboard to lock in 2666 megahertz at least and change your timings. This thing here just doesn't give you that option, but furthermore, there's no heatsink on the platform chipset hub. It's just got nothing on it. And coupled with the fact that the VRM has no heat sinks on it, it looks pretty cheap, this allows the i5-8400 to go all the way up to 65 watts in the stress test, when i5-8400s usually use up a little bit less power if you've got proper cooling and proper components feeding them power. So I'm not exactly sure what Acer is trying to portray here with this Nitro series. Essentially, you're buying an expensive pre-built system that isn't running as well as it should be out of the box. Furthermore, you've got to jump through hoops just to get your system running properly. However, the problems don't just stop there. When I tried to install Windows 10 Pro, I was only greeted with the option of not having any options, in that it would automatically install Windows 10 Home and it would force that install. And you can't upgrade the OS after that. So whatever deals Acer is doing with both the motherboard manufacturers, which in this case, they're using either a company called Quanta or Compal, and Microsoft has me, like, I'm seriously confused here. I'm guessing that they're going for the cheapest options available on motherboards, coolers, and also RAM and GPUs, and they're sourcing all this stuff so cheap that they don't realize that the end user in the end is missing out. So basically, in a nutshell, when you see an OEM system like this and you think, wow, it looks good, I'm gonna have no problems, you may wish to think again, because the amount of problems I had just to get this thing running to a smooth gaming experience left me scratching my head. It shouldn't be happening in any pre-built gaming desktop that's sold on the market to this day. And in fact, what I saw with this Acer PC was pretty much everything inside it, besides the 8400, the two drives and the power supply, weren't really up to par. And so at least they did put in an FSP 80 plus bronze power supply. That was pretty good to see. I've used a lot of FSP power supplies in the past and they are pretty decent. But as we said before, everything from the RAM to the cooler to the motherboard to the GPU was just really lacking, and they didn't even put in an exhaust fan to exhaust heat out of what would be considered a mid-range gaming PC, where in a small case like this, heat is going to accumulate pretty quickly. And with all those complaints aside, it's finally now time to boot up Fortnite and see if this computer has any more issues with dropped FPS or stuttering frames. So the FPS is now fixed, it's now running really smoothly, but I probably will add in an exhaust fan as well just to cool down temperatures on this system. And the last thing I'm gonna say is, and what worries me about this PC here is that this is a reason people wonder why, for instance, the competition between AMD and Intel, it's kind of been a big argument lately. But when we look at Ryzen systems, they're really good value for money. And you're probably thinking, well, companies are going to change over, like Acers and Dells and stuff like that. They're all going to change over to Ryzen and realize it's better value for money. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe not if they keep having the incentive to use a single stick of memory and it's really clocked low, because I do know from my testing that Intel CPUs do perform better with lower clocked memory, both in single and dual channel memory. The AMD Ryzen systems do scale a lot better with more higher speed memory. And so when you look at that picture and you relate it back to systems like these, you can see why these companies have these incentives just to cheap out on everything, just so they can get that spec sheet looking good at the end of the day. And it's one thing that I'm going to implore you guys, if you know people who are looking for pre-builts, go out and buy pre-builts off small businesses that actually build proper PCs, and they're not trying to pull this stuff what with what Acer's doing with this Nitro system here. It's really not good for a gamer, especially a gamer in the long term that wants to get smooth FPS and a non-stuttering experience. So basically there's the journey finished with the N50 600 series desktop Nitro gaming PC. I'm guessing the only thing that's getting boosted here with the Nitro is your wallet. So do be careful of that when you go out and think about buying something like this. I was just kind of like realized what's going on here, and it's just I guess a cheap special where everything's getting cheaped out on. I mean, the fact that they're not including an exhaust fan with like a PC that easily in Australia this thing would have costed over, I'm guessing $1,500 when it was sold. It's beyond me. They're just cheaped out on so many ways possible. And at the end of the day, it's all in the name of making the most amount of profit possible. And you can see that with this PC right here. But anyway, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, then be sure to hit that like button for us. And also let us know in the comment section below what you think about PCs like this, pre-builts like this. Do you think they need to change their game and at least include some of the what I feel is the basic necessities, as I love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. And speaking of thoughts and opinions, we got the question of the day, which comes from Jackin Deluxe, and he asked, what was your biggest PC related mistake? And this comes in the form of, actually in the last few months I've made I guess it's a big mistake, and it happened when I was making the thumbnail for the $55 Fortnite gaming PC. I'll put the link to that video up here. And that PC, I ran everything. The video went so well, but then afterwards I was trying to take a thumbnail on my balcony. But in the end, I actually had to end up photoshopping the thumbnail, because what happened was when I put it on the balcony and I plugged the power up, it just this massive bang. I've never heard such a loud bang come from a power supply in my life. And I realized, oh no, that power supply is gone. And so that TX 750 that I used in that video, it was ruined. And so the biggest mistake I made there was not turning that switch to the O position before I plugged in an extension cable. So this is probably like I'd say it'd be about a 5-meter extension cable. And so that's a lesson I've learned now, is when you're using really long leads, or even if you're using short leads, just make sure that power supply is always in that O position before you plug it in, especially with high-powered power supplies, because this one, it was in that I position, the on position, and when I turned it on and when I plugged the power in, it just bang. And so that was one of the biggest mistakes I've made, both in terms of foolishness, but also in terms of something that's costed me a little bit of money, because the TX 750 power supply is actually quite expensive. Anyway, with that all aside, guys, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. If you're enjoying the content, you've stayed this far, and you're not yet subbed and you want to see it as soon as it drops, don't forget to hit that sub button, ring the bell, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.